a little bit about studies about therapy, and then we go to how to really do the therapy. It's a German background slide, and you can't see much of it anyway, but this is kind of what therapy, looking for the right therapy, can look like for a patient. You know, like they have the Institute Himalaya and all those really tough overview. You might know of those studies who asked people what the difference is between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, and a psychopath. Yes, the psychopath was in there and was not really distinguished as clearly as we would like, not at all. So it's difficult for a patient to find out where could they go and what is a good address. But it's also, GAD is a challenge, I think, for many of us. And I would like to include myself there for different reasons. One is the diagnosis is, of all the anxiety disorders, actually the most unreliable. Whenever you do studies and whatever, and even if you use standardized interviews, the inter-rater reliability is lowest where GAD is concerned. So the differential diagnosis or the threshold thing, is this severely enough to say it is GAD? Although at least for us Europeans, I think there's even more into that. We do not like the diagnosis of GAD. I have no idea if that's the same here in Israel. But we don't have such a clear-cut idea what to do with it, with these variants. And can we treat it, and can we treat it successfully, as someone pointed out. So we also don't like to give the diagnosis, because with panic we know what to do, with OCD we know what to do. We might be successful or not successful, but we have a rather clear idea how to go ahead with treatment. But with GAD, there are more options, but it's also less of a success story usually. And that makes us very wary to give the diagnosis. So I think that is also a factor that contributes to the problems with it. Okay, then you have the comorbidity with depression. And that makes it difficult, because depression is something, if it's severe enough, you really have to treat. So also GAD, both, can you do it together? So what is it? The other anxiety disorders. You have in GAD more of a chronification than you have with some other disorders. So usually if you have GAD and you are already in the mid-20s, it will stay with you. The spontaneous remission rate for GAD is really low. So it's better with other things. There isn't 100% procedure. So whatever I'm telling you today, I think it's pretty good, but it is pretty good. I mean, we are becoming, I think, at least something I see clearly now in the Netherlands, much more critical in how good are we really in treating patients. In depression, for example, it looks rather grim. If you really look at long-term studies, there is a clear chronification in depression. 60% is the estimate of people that go after a while into chronic depression that we seem to be very unable to treat, neither by medication nor by psychotherapy. So you have to be realistic. You can treat GAD with much more success, I would say, than depression, but no comparison to panic, for example. So it's not something that's so easy. And that's what I mean. The therapy is success because it's so chronified. And I also think because it's so very much linked to you as a person, as a worrier, your personality. That makes change much harder. These are very ingrained patterns that you show with worrying. And I see it as a coping factor, as we will talk about, yeah? And it's really in there. And so this all makes it a story that is not as clear-cut and therefore not as much liked by us to consider if you think about the diagnosis. The most recent meta study is by Pim Kuipers. And actually, together with the group in Texas, we have just sent one in, so we did another one. And we have slightly different results from PIMS. I will mention that, but ours isn't out yet. And what you can see is that cognitive behavioral therapy is effective in treating CBT. So this is the bottom and is the good line. And also has considerable effects on depression because it's so highly comorbid. If you then look at the Hamilton D or the BDI, and even without having addressed the depression, these are research studies, depression goes down. So that's also good. Yeah?
So often when you see several disorders together and the depression is also quite prominent, let's say the GAD is also quite prominent, often we say treat the depression first. But in this instance, would there be cases where you would go for GAD with some ameliorating effects?
I would really look at what was first, because anxiety is a motor for depression. So if you get agoraphobic, you have a lot of social withdrawal because you can't do things anymore. You are quite likely to develop depression. If you treat the agoraphobia, often the depression goes away. So no, there are quite some instances where I would start with the anxiety disorder. And that might be one. Yeah?
Will you talk about combination with medications?
I can talk about that. Yeah. After that one. Okay. I admit I have deleted the slides. I'm sorry because I thought this is getting too much because I knew it's not the 16-hour workshop. So some slides are gone. But okay. Long-term effects are still a bit not enough studies that have a long-term follow-up to say things. And yeah. What is also nice is, well, I just brought it, these are the effect sizes. And he looked a little bit on different techniques. So if you compare CBT, where there's pure applied relaxation, they are almost comparable. The CBT does a bit better. I'm just summarizing it for you before you go into all those numbers, sorry. But usually we have two little studies to really look at the different techniques because CBT is a huge field of things you do. And I have a German slide where Rumland did a meta study, and I think it's the only one who did it, who really looked at different techniques. And there's a bit older, applied relaxation was one of the best treatments. Things change. Some Dutch did some very unsuccessful applied relaxation studies. I myself did rather well. You see, biofeedback is something you probably shouldn't do. Psychodynamics isn't doing so well. CBT in his study was comparable to medication. In our study, CBT does better than medication. So we have been able to include about 7 more studies than are in there, and the picture changes somewhat. On the other hand, they found that older patients are as easily to treat as younger ones. And in our studies, again, from an older, yes, if they are older, they are more difficult to treat. Not as good. Okay.
Can you just explain the statistic? I don't.
Oh, yeah.
The G, what does it mean, the G?
The G is one of the effect sizes, one of the manys that are used.
So the higher, the more effect size, the more.
Yeah, the more clearer is the advantage of one over the other. And you can see that the G is pretty small if you look at CBT versus applied relaxation, and then the G gets somewhat higher with the psychodynamic and with the biofeedback. Clearly, CBT is much better than biofeedback, and it's better than supportive therapy. Yeah. And if I can remember correctly, mindfulness is an option in from the meta-analysis. And I was kind of surprised not to find it here. I looked it up in preparation for my workshop here. But I know from the meta-analysis that mindfulness is also doing pretty well as an option. That's the newest kid on the block, and it seems to make sense in GAD. It just is one of the most difficult therapies to give and to receive. I am a trained mindfulness trainer. I've done mindfulness treatment with patients. I see the advantages, but I also see the disadvantages. So what I always have to warn against is it's bloody damn difficult, you know? Yeah, and lots of homework and lots of training and very tough to take. So to keep that in mind, because at least in Europe it's the total fashion. You do mindfulness for everything, always a bad idea. But here it makes sense, but it would not be my first choice just because it's so damn difficult for the patients. Okay. And also he found that actually internet therapy did very well. In GAD we do have several treatment studies that delivered internet therapy, and there was not a big difference in the meta-analysis. So there seems to be some good things out there. Yeah. Well, a little bit of narcissism. That is a study that we did where we compared applied relaxation with exposure by itself. Yeah, I know, a complicated graph. Not too bad, actually. So blue is the weight line and nothing much happens before and after. But you can see that both treatments were pretty effective in the anxiety and in the depression. Oh, I forgot to translate that. I'm sorry. That slipped my English radar. And it's my own graph there. I could have translated it. I'm so sorry. So the blue is waitlist control, and the green is applied relaxation, and the red is exposure therapy alone. 15 session, comorbid patients, nothing else, nothing mixed in there. And the long term was also good. And no difference between applied relaxation and exposure. Although I am admittedly clearly an exposure person. More things are happening, more interesting, less patience asked for. I have to plead guilty where patience is concerned and patience. Sorry. Okay. So your treatment options, if you think about treatment options, CBT is a clear treatment option, and as I said, in our meta-analysis, it's better than medication. You ask about combination with medication. I usually hate it, but then on the other hand, it's the usual thing you have to do. The problem is in exposure, if you think about it. Let's start with panic and agoraphobia. What you want to do in exposure therapy for panic and agoraphobia is to show them that even if I get them as anxious as they've never ever been in their life, they're not going to die. And whatever they do, they cannot die. I let my patients hyperventilate if they do not get anxious enough. So I take them to a supermarket or on a tower or in a plane, and if they do not get enough of a full-blown panic, I let them hyperventilate to really get it out of there, to show them they cannot die. That's why I say it's cognitive therapy. If you are on medication, you might think that if you had not been on medication, you would have been even more anxious and you would have been able to die. Damn it. And that means that medication, so I'm not, there might be more reasons to be against medications, be fair, but the major reason I'm not happy with medication if I do exposure is that it does not allow the cognitive experience that I'm aiming for. So I usually try to get rid of it.
If you want it, you try and get rid of it in order to do the treatment.
Yeah, if I can. But that is the advantage of always working in university settings, huh? Yeah, that's...
No, I totally agree with you, but I tell people not to go on it until we've had a trial of CBT.
Yeah, that's also nice. Yeah, we also get off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much harder.
Yeah, we did that. And it is much harder. And it might not work. And then you might have to play around how much of the attribution goes now to the medication. And so that's my first line is trying to get off. If that's not possible, I do it. You always have an allotment of sessions where I'm from. So I will reserve some and say, now you do homework, you try with your doctor to get rid of it because problem is gone. Medication could go on. I know this will be problematic, and the rest of my sessions will see that you can do that transition. That's another option. Once in a while you just can't do it. Yeah.
Maybe you'll talk about it, the acceptability of the treatment, exposure versus applied relaxation. To what degree patients, when they know what exposure means, are they willing to have this as a treatment as compared to other treatment options? But maybe you will talk about it later.
It's a tricky question. Now it's the question. It's a tricky one, because if you really let them choose, as I'm probably ethically supposed to do, and I already say I give myself away, yeah, they will all choose applied relaxation. Absolutely, and every one of them. The idea that they could do it with less pain is just I would do the same. If I could circumvent, getting really anxious and going through all that pain, yes. But why do I then do exposure? I do exposure because I think you have less of a relapse. Because exposure cannot really fail you.
Do you have more dropout though?
Sometimes yes, in some studies yes. And there is the hubris, no, not me, I'm pretty good at convincing people. But I don't let them choose. I choose for them. I choose for them. And I choose, but I do not always choose exposure. And that will be one of the next slides.
May I ask?
Yeah.
I wonder, you showed us that internet interventions are quite as well as face-to-face.
Yeah.
So I wonder, what do they do in the internet interventions, if it's more of exposure or...
It's more of coping. It's less exposure because people can't expose. What they usually do is a kind of an in-between thing. They have this worry hour. So people are supposed to, in the evening or whatever, reserve half an hour or an hour and write about their worries. And that is kind of an exposure. I don't think a super effective one, but actually, as a prevention, if you work with student population, they just start their worry career, so to speak, it's becoming a problem. That is one of the interventions. I think Paul van der Heijden tested it, if I have the right name to it. That works pretty well. Overday, a worry stop. Make a note what you were worrying about, concentrate on other things, take your time in the evening. 2 mechanisms you learn to try to stop over day, knowing that you will have time in the evening, and in the evening you have some kind of worry time, though, that is something that's not bad, and that's usually in those, that is the exposure part that is usually in those kind of internet trainings. Yeah. Okay, so this works, metacognition, uncertainty, very few studies, but seems to do okay. Not enough to really summarize. And the metacognitive therapy, although it has been out there now for 15 years at least, I would say, only 2 studies so far, 1 pilot and 1 study. Yes. Sorry, well, I might be mistaken, but not far off, I promise. Exposure alone also hardly tested, in all fairness. So here I am and tell you, please expose, but be careful. I'm biased. Applied relaxation, much better tested. And looking good, and mindfulness, as I said. And so what does the choice depend on? How do you choose what you do? My first thing I look at is as the comorbidity. So what are the other disorders that I have? If I have some other clear-cut anxiety disorders, and I will do exposure anyway with them, and so I will stick to exposure, but exposure in sensu, imaginary exposure, to my GAD patients. If the comorbidity is with depression, you have more options to choose of, because exposure doesn't play a very big role in depression. If you don't see activation as an exposure, you might be able, you can combine depression, the common expression therapy, with exposure, but also with applied relaxation. Maybe you do mindfulness anyway if it's a more chronified one, then stick to mindfulness. So always try to do as little different techniques. We are not very good in choosing and keeping those things apart. So when should I relax and when should I expose? Bad idea. Try to keep it in one line. Resilience. You might have patients that are really not very resilient. For example, they had psychosis before? Do you then want to expose them, or they have some kind of medical conditions or those kind of things? And that is something simply to think about. I do exposure quite often nevertheless, but you have to have a very good network then if you do that, because they can get into a crisis. Exposure is strenuous. It's something that takes a toll, that's fine, if you are sure that they will not fall through some kind of net. Otherwise, maybe it's better to keep a safer option and go for coping and do applied relaxation. I've been honored being part of a big project where they did really severe, extensive exposure for patients who are schizophrenic and have PTSD. They have a very bad prognosis because the trauma always triggers the psychosis again. The psychosis makes it very difficult to do trauma, and they were usually never ever given so far, I think more or less, at least not systematically, exposure, because everyone was afraid the exposure would then trigger the psychosis. And that was done, and successfully. So you can do that in the group. And so the PTSD, that was the targeted one, was really, really way improved. But also there were very little incidences where the psychosis got worse. Most people really profited and the psychosis got better. So I'm talking about resilience. I'm not saying that you cannot do exposure in those kind of cases, but it's something to think about. How stable is my patient? Exposure is always, it puts stress on people. Yeah, and the last one is your own preference. You know, it's there. You cannot delete it. You shouldn't do. We all have preferences, but it should come last. So you should first look at the other things and then decide what you do. And then if it evens out, you are totally free to choose what you like more. Exposure. Or, yeah, you know, or not then, huh? But never do exposure if you yourself are really afraid of exposure. If you have a chance, go with someone who loves to do exposure once, have a look. I'm sure you will lose your fear of exposing people. And afterwards, it's a lot of fun. Yes, you have to be a tiny little bit sadistic, but it's a lot of fun. Okay. So if you go for
an alternative to dentistry.
Yeah. I always say short-term pain instead of long-term suffering, huh? Okay. So, if you do therapy, I will go over this also in regard of time, I think, pretty quickly, but always ask questions if you wonder. Don't forget there should always be a little bit of psychoeducation. Just because you've done it 30 of times, the patients, for him, it's probably the first time. They might have some weird ideas might be out of there, you know? And so the usual stuff is what is anxiety, and I explain a bit about the difference of fear and anxiety, fear being the direct response to a threat, and anxiety is more the worrying, the expectation part, a fight-flight phenomena that they don't have, but that's, you know, and instead talk more about the anticipatory anxiety that's typical for GAD. What is a generalized anxiety disorder? I mean, listen to that YouTube nowadays has had the diagnosis for 5 years and had no idea. That shouldn't happen. I mean, people should know what they have and what's out there. Also to be able to get information. And I tell them a bit about what are worries, the things we just talked about. So you should have now a very nice background in what to do. Okay, and then I usually build with them not a maintenance model but a model how the thing came about. So why did I develop GAD? That's actually something I would guess that you do with most of your patients. So why did I get depressed, or why did I get a panic? Do you or don't you? Who builds models with patients or explanation models? Yeah. Okay. So in GAD, it's not so different, but it's a bit different. There are some challenges if you build such a model. And so this is we're looking at the causes, causes and triggers. These are the two things I'm looking at right now. What makes it a bit of a challenge in GAD is that people cannot pinpoint when it started. So if you have panic, it's quite easy. First panic attack, was there a stressor? Do you have role models? You know, all those kind of stuff, very easy in panic. But here it's like, I always had it, I probably also had it as a child, so why did I develop it? And I recently, for myself, I'm a fan of mind mapping. I mind mapped a bit to sort the kind of things. Let me shortly walk it through. It is just, I think it's quite nice. So if you look at it, what are the usual vulnerabilities? Genetic is something patients think about, or it is more like you learned it from the families, or you had experiences. So these are the three clusters I'm thinking about. So this is my mind map, my own model of how I think about what do I have to explain. So if you have patients, well, the first question I usually ask about the model is, what do you think, why did you get it? So first make sure what their explanation is about, you know. But then if you want to explore it, you go like, were there family members? Do you think it could be genetic, or is it something you've learned? If it's family members, what kind of problems? What does a patient know about genetic? Because that can get you into trouble. If you have a patient who thinks it's all in the genes, and you do have them once in a while, what do they imply with saying it's all in the genes? Yeah, you can't do anything. It should be biological or whatever, no psychotherapy certainly, and whatever. So it might be good. What do you tell those patients? How do you handle that?
It's a predisposition, it's not a...
Yeah? And do you bring examples, or how do you do it? Because I do. Medical model, like diabetes is a very nice one to show that. And if they are interested a bit in science, I can go a bit far with science, but it's my hobby, huh? Science. It's, for example, the Americans can now clone their pets. If you have enough money, you can clone your pet. So someone cloned his cat, and he got his cat back. And the cat had different fur color and different eye color than the clone, than the mother. Yeah. What they were American. What did they do? Sue. Exactly. They sued. But it was the exact clone. How can that happen? Same genes, different cat, different looks, different food, different mother, different environment. So it's a nice example to show that actually with the same genes, yeah, and that actually we do by now know that our genes, at least the genes that are active, are changing all the time depending on our experiences and what we eat and all those kind of stuff. So it's not fate, and you might have to go into that a bit. Then you have role models where there are other family members that also worried a lot, that were also very anxious, or friends. You could also think about attachment styles or those kind of things. Overprotective, we talk a lot about the helicopter parents. Were the helicopter parents? Was a lot of you taken so that you could actually not make the experience that you have control over the world, or that you can do things. Then there are the triggers. The triggers come later. And the last vulnerabilities is experience. Were there any kind of traumas? I talked a little bit already about my patient who was so afraid of the war, that the new war would be coming after 9/11. Let me tell you a little bit about her childhood. And it's true for some of the patients. When she started already pretty badly. She was born in the very last months of the Second World War in Dresden. And when she was two months old, there was the bombing of Dresden. Dresden was more or less, the inner city was more or less completely destroyed, and many, many, many people died. It was full of refugees at the time. Her family was in a cellar, and they were buried for 2 days in the cellar. They survived, but it was traumatic for the whole family. When she was 3.5 or so, her mother died. Her father married, and not very luckily, marry in haste, repent in leisure, you know that, huh? And so lots of fights at home, and she was always giving to her aunt, and she developed a severe separation anxiety, being afraid to lose her father again or her aunt again, and with the mother didn't work out. Okay, that is already pretty bad, and that shows a child that there is bad things happen and there's very little a child can do about it. So these are experiences that are not good for any of us, and they lead usually to psychological problems. It does not have to be GAD, it's not specific, but it's also there in GAD. Can be depression, can be something else. In her case, you once in a while have those kind of patients that are just so very unlucky. So this was already, I thought, pretty bad to grow up. She married, her father committed suicide. 2 more suicides in the family later on. Her husband died when she was 40. That's also a bit early, you know. And before she came to me in treatment, 2 years before, she was the last East German working in a West German, by then West German hotel, and she felt very much bullied and out of it, and lots of stress. And she woke up one morning, and that morning she couldn't really see things clearly. She had a hard time talking. She couldn't move some of her things, and she just thought it's a very bad flu, too much stress. Didn't go to the doctor in time. She had had a stroke. Yeah, so you see this repeated trauma. It's a subgroup of our GAD patients. We've run this bigger study in Dresden, and we had an unproportional high number of women who had lost a child. Luckily, we don't do that very often anymore, so it's very unlikely to meet someone, but in patients again. Huh? So we had 4 women in our then not so great sample anymore that had lost children. So you have traumata there that can trigger it, and GAD is one way to cope with it. But it could also be chronic stressors. And then you might have triggers, but triggers are a bit more tricky in GAD, because what really started the thing going, that might be a move, a change in environment, a work, personal, those kind of things. What is important is the lowest line, because in the end what you're looking for in GAD are 2 basic schemata. One is the world is dangerous, and the second is there's not much I can do about it. So low coping expectation and high danger expectation. And whatever you find up there that feeds into here will probably explain the GAD. And usually if there are workshops, I also let you interact and do things. And I think you're all getting a bit tired. So my first thing I would like you to do is to, with 2 people or 3, whatever you feel more comfortable, build such a model. It's nice if the person who is the patient, please, really has GAD. Okay, and pick one of your own patients, and the other can build about how did it do. What is the goal? Why do we do that? Different goals. One goal is to give the patient an explanation, and he will hopefully feel better and not guilty and not I'm psychologically ill and I could never cope, but instead see, well, you see your parents didn't give you a chance, or there seems to be also some biology that maybe makes it harder. So you try to get rid of guilt and you try to make sense for them. The other is, it's a wonderful first practice to show a patient how to work together. I mean, this is usually in the first session or the second treatment session. You know, you did the psychoeducation, this is part of psychoeducation. And you want to show them Socratic dialogue. You want to show them that you explore ideas, and you don't have a fixed outcome that makes it so much easier. I'm not a great cognitive therapist. I muddle along because I want them to get it. And so I push way too hard. I know it of myself, so I try to not do it. But that is my biggest failure, that I'm pushing them. You don't have to push here. That's so nice. You can simply explore and see what happens. And if you want, you can link those things I've here as circles that go around to GAD with this outcome. That, yeah, you have made experience that the world is not a very safe place, probably, yeah? Or, admittedly, for some, it's that you are responsible to make the world safe. It does not always have to be the experience, but that's also very GAD. I am the one who has to somehow solve it, and I can't. I have to make it for my kids.
But that's also OCD in terms of the over-responsibility.
Sure. That's what they share. There are things they share. This is something they share. Over-responsible, and on the same time not feeling able to. And OCD goes a long way for this responsibility, and GAD takes just one step, the worrying step, you know, if you think about it like that. So I would like for you to do in 15 minutes, get together and build such a model. And you can use those kind of things if you want to look circles. I'll leave this up here so you see what kind of questions you could ask or in what kind of direction you can go. It's very open-ended. You cannot really go wrong. The only thing that would be wrong if in the end you have just one cause, because then you should also treat that. If it's just genes or it's all the parents' faults, you will not get far. So see to it that several things have contributed. You look at me still a bit puzzled. Is that because now you have to work or because you don't know what kind of work you have to do? Maybe I'm just pushing you a bit and think you know what you should do, and so I would like to ask you to do it. Or do you have still questions what you to do? And we have a pretty big room. If you want to, you can move a bit so that you can do it with someone else. So find a partner and build for the patient a model why they got GAD. So if you no. Did you encounter any problems?
Lack of information.
From the patient?
Yes.
Okay.
Early stages. Yeah, I should know, but I don't know. But it's
So, someone said they had too few information. May I ask you a little bit? No? A little bit about, was that a real patient that had a hard time to come up with things that you played?
Her patient, yeah.
Yeah.
He came in a crisis after
Yeah.
his past therapist had passed away
Oh.
suddenly, and he was in such a crisis that she sort of jumped into treatment without getting as much of a history in terms of genetics and family
Yeah.
of origin stuff. And we
So
were
you had to
focused
make it up on the way.
And being bullied as a child.
Being bullied as a child is something because you feel helpless. Huh? So it fits. So I think what's always important is to keep. Oh, it did go away. That was not what I intended. Where is my mind map? Gone, huh? Someone stole my mind map. Okay. Yeah. So if you keep the schema in your mind, that really helps. Were there other things you would like to discuss or talk about? Okay. I was told that the Israelis are very good at those kind of things, that you have good training. The Germans don't. We usually are very good at ignoring all this background stuff and want to jump in right away, and that's not always a good idea. So having you go through the practice, you might have profited less than my German colleagues do. But it also is a nice way to get into the GAD head. So if you played a good GAD patient, what might happen is like, could it be genetic, or do you think it's genetic? If it would be genetic, do you think my kids could also get GAD? So this is something that is probably not so easy to role play, but if you have a good patient, that is one of the challenges with GADs. You can't become afraid that whatever you say, they use it as a loop off to worry what this means. Can I get out? Can I not get out? Okay, let's move on. Actually, let's move on, wrong direction. Actually, Actually, I'm still with the psychoeducation, and part of what I do in psychoeducation is also I start with diaries. And I usually do not use prefab diaries, but develop a diary where I am or what I'm talking about. I brought some examples here of basic diaries, how you usually, or I usually start. So the first one would be the very content, what do people worry about, but I'm more interested actually in the times. And so what days and how much time do they spend, and is there some kind of pattern, more on the weekend, more in the evenings, more in the mornings. I want to get a first overview about worry episodes. And since they worry about almost everything, I don't care so much about the content, but the patients care about the content, so it's easier to put it in there. And GAD patients are very nice in filling out those kind of things.
Okay.
Very, sometimes too much. You can get really detailed diaries back. Okay, the next one would be if I'm interested in triggers. So what triggers a worry? So I would ask, what is the trigger, or what happened before you started with the worry? So is there things that trigger it? Or I might be interested in their kind of safety behavior. Then I would use the diary. Are there measures? What measures do you take? What are your control mechanisms? How do you try to handle it? That depends a bit on where your focus are right now in therapy. And it's just to give you an idea what you can do with those kind of diaries. I usually do not put all of it in one diary. It becomes too much to fill in and to understand. So I usually change them while we go through therapy. But usually they fill in some kind of diary for me. Yeah?
Can you explain the difference between anxiety and tension to the patient?
I usually have both. Yeah. If I explain it to a patient, anxiety is the subjective emotion and tension is the arousal part. Some things might also get lost in translation here. And but that is the difference more. And some hate, and then you have preferences by patients. Some admit that they're anxious, some don't. But tension, they usually all admit to. So I have a second measurement that shows me how bad it is. Okay. So if you want to sell the one's back. If I want to sell exposure, I need a little bit of background, because I also have to explain to patients why I do want to expose them. Why do I want to treat them so nastily? So I need some background to explain why it might be worthwhile doing an exposure. And for this, let's go a little bit into the function of the worry. So, or also features of worry. I'm pretty sure you all know the white bear experiment. So that's not a function of worry, but that you try to control worry all about. So if I would now ask you for a minute to not to think about a white bear, good luck. And it's what Wegner calls the ironic processes of mental control. As soon as we target something that we do not want to think about, it's much more likely that we think about it, because we have a monitor going on that has to see, have you thought about it? Probably you are familiar, the white bears. Wegner wrote a lovely book about it and did several really nice studies on it. The white bear comes from Tolstoy. Tolstoy had a biography, and he wrote that his big brother told him to stand in the corner, and he could only leave the corner if he was not thinking of a white bear. That's more or less impossible, because the moment you think I can get out, you've thought of a white bear. And Tolstoy was totally mind-boggling of standing in that stupid corner, and he'd never thought of a white bear. Most of us, I think, use pink elephants. This is the American version of the white bear. I'm sticking to the white bear. I like the story so much. And that's also an experiment you can do with patients to convince them that their control mechanisms aren't working. You know, if you try not to think of a white bear, it's almost impossible. The other thing I thought interesting is those worry chains. When I started a long time ago with my PhD, I switched from panic disorder to GAD. And I was wondering, and maybe that was very naive of me, I was wondering why there was no habituation. Someone worries up to 10 hours a day, every day, for 6 years. So you could say he exposes. So they seem to be thinking about it all the time. So why doesn't it go away? It didn't seem to fit my idea of how it should be. But if you think about it, if you would have an agoraphobic patient, and the agoraphobic patient goes into a shopping mall for 2 minutes and on a tower for 5, and he takes a peek into a church, and then he takes a ride in the car for 5 minutes, but then rather gets out on the train. He would not have habituation, and he could do it all days. And he would get some panic attacks also once in a while. The thing is, worry chaining, the typical thing how you worry in patients, and here it is unfortunate that I cannot show you my patient videos, because there I could show you again and again and again. You ask them something and they just veer off in all directions. So I would ask, are you worried about your financial situation? Oh no, my finances are pretty good, but if I would get ill, that might become a problem. And but actually, who would look after me if I would become ill? That would be the bigger problem. And my kids are too far away. They really can't look after me. Oh yeah, and my youngest son, he has financial problems, do you know? And this is a verbatim, more or less, of one of my patients. So you trigger one and it just is all interlinked. And that doesn't fit our idea about exposure. And that's important to keep in mind. If you do exposure, you want to have them focused on one thing and not switching all the time. And so that worries, the way worries are in GAD patients, and that means they really have those chains. One is linked to another, to another, to another, and to another. It has a function. It keeps the arousal level high, but not unbearable high. So worry does regulate your emotions. Worry is an emotion regulation strategy. And if you worry, you are way less likely to get a panic attack. Let's put it bluntly. Or probably you are way less likely to grieve really, because we have, as I said, those women who lost their children, but we also have women who lost partners or whatever. There is quite a subgroup who had losses in their life. Worry sees to it that you don't go into that grief, into that painful grief. It can also help you not to get totally angry about something. So that is something that's very interesting and holds true, is that GAD is about avoidance of emotions and not per se avoidance of anxiety. That's important to keep in mind, because if you do exposure, people might also become totally sad or crying and you've done a successful exposure, or they might become angry. So you do not target anxiety per se, you target in the end their avoidance of emotions. And that's what worry does. Okay. Another thing that worry does, emotion regulation. Worry almost always comes in forms of verbal material. People tell themselves stories. They think about it. It's verbal. Oh, I hope I will be in time. But very few see pictures. Some do. I did an interview once there, about 4% did it. And I've seen studies where it goes up to 10%. But they think in words. Words are less emotionally loaded and triggering than pictures. So if you imagine something, or if then you have much more arousal in there. You have more intense emotional impact of pictures. So in the worries, by the way how they are done verbally, are also, again, a kind of an avoidance of the intense emotion. Also means if you do exposure, try to get it as vivid as possible. If they're not very good with pictures, try other tricks to make it vivid. By imagine that you hear things, to get them really in, because you want to get them into the emotions. And this was too fast. Yeah. So we have the thought suppression that plays a role why that worry is going on for so much time. And we have, more importantly, the worry as the cognitive avoidance change of worries. And we do have some studies, and also Bokovec and Hu and Bokovec and Inns, that do show that it comes with a physiological payoff worrying, strangely enough. You have less of an arousal. So there is really something to that theory. And if you look at all those different models that we have right now for GAD, avoidance model of worry in GAD by Bokovec, intolerance of uncertainty, metacognitive emotion dysregulation, Manning, I really like that one, acceptance-based model of generalized anxiety disorder, these are the more mindfulness acceptance therapy people. But one thing they really, really, really all have in common in the end is the avoidance of emotions. So they go into different directions, they add something else, but all current models tend to underscore that the avoidance of internal experiences of the emotions seem to be the core of the disorder and why worry does exist. So this is good to keep as an idea and as a background, what's going on. And so you have the cognitive avoidance, emotional avoidance, intolerance of uncertainty, but and it can be combined with positive beliefs. So they are also something that keep worry going. If I think it prepares me, or I'm a better mother, or I'm sensitive, responsible person, whatever worrying makes me, it's also something that maintains worry. Doesn't have to be a function of that. Questions so far? Or yeah.
Are these things compatible, positive beliefs about worry, and while being concerned about the effects of worry?
Yeah, unfortunately there are, but one of the techniques doing metacognitive therapy is to put those two against each other. So how can it be? Does it make you sick? Does it prepare you? Is it worth the preparation you get out of it to get so sick? So you can play those things against each other if you choose a cognitive approach. But we can have opposite ideas at the same time about things. Yeah. Okay. So if you look at the worrying process or try to come up with this, there are several things that play together and play a role to keep the worry going. One is you have the reduced concreteness, and with this I mean the verbal nature of the worry. And this leads to reduced physiological activity, and that means you are negatively reinforced. These are things we know from other disorders. We also have no habituation because of the worrying chains that are in there. And we do have a poor avoidant in there too. So let me mention that. Should I go slower because I see all the pictures? You will get them, yeah, but I still see people holding up their phones. Does that make you happy? 1, 2, 3?
Each one of these second photos became part of the experience today.
I'm still building on it.
When will you send them?
I am, this evening.
It's going to open in the right way, so.
But I'm warning you right now, there aren't that many nice photos in there, but all the photos will be removed in the slides. I picked them from internet. I don't know if I have the copyright. Not the graphs, they were the research part, but the rest will have to go. No Woody Allen for you. Okay. We do have also what we have in other anxiety disorders. We do have safety behavior and we have avoidance behavior. You have seen GAD patients. What would you say? What is the most prominent instrument of safety behavior in GAD? It's a leading question. I never should do that. It's the mobile phone. Just think about it. I think it was invented for GAD. You know, it just feeds into that. Since we have mobile phones, they can track their loved ones, you know, and they usually do. Teenagers hate their mothers. They can track them, they can check, they can phone after. Are you still fine? Are you on the way? Where are you? WhatsApp. Did they get the message? If they got the message, they're still alive. Huh? You can see that. Did it turn blue or she's online? Maybe, yeah, good luck. So the mobile phone is a safety behavior. And remember, safety behaviors have to be tackled if you do treatment. Huh? So avoidance is reassurance. A lot of them, reassurance, and the mobile phone is the reinsurance. Huh? Or you simply ask people, are you fine? Are you on your way? You know, or will the party go well? Do you think we are well prepared? Those kind of things. It also leads, but it's an aside, it does lead to family tension. Those of you who followed Borkovec will know that for about 10 years he had a whole string of lovely studies on interpersonal treatment as an add-on for GAD, because there is a lot of tension in those families, and same with OCD. I think it comes because of the over-controlling nature, actually. So he added the interpersonal one, but I thought that was one of his greatest moments. Never forget it. Tom Borkovec gave a talk where he summarized his 10 years of intensive and expensive research and said it does not add. We could not improve treatment by looking at the relationships. So my guess would be better try to get rid of the safety behavior for the disorder than open the whole thing about the family and family relations. I would hope they normalize if you can target that. Okay, medication might be in there or distraction. I mean, a lot of patients try to distract if they are worried and are not very successful. I mean, they also, I think, choose the strangest strategies. Cleaning. Why should cleaning distract me from worrying? Who thinks if she or he cleans? I don't. My head is still quite open for worrying or other things when I clean. But there are all those kind of things they do to do it. Okay. So, reduced physiological control attempts. The control attempts feed back to it too, huh? Don't think of the white bear. So another thing that goes in there. Okay, too fast. So, in general, the exposure rationale is not so different from other anxiety disorders. It's like, because you distract and you avoid, you cannot experience it. The biggest difference is that it's not about learning that the anxiety will not kill you. So what do you want to do if you expose? As I said, for exposure, it is a cognitive shift you want to make. Where's the cognitive shift in GAD? For me, the cognitive shift in GAD is you can stand intense emotions. It will not harm you. And you can simply stand it, because that seems to be something that GADs are very much convinced that they just can't. It's rather more vague than with panic, where they think they will die of it. A GAD patient usually is not afraid of dying from exposure, because they haven't experienced panic attacks. So for them, it's not they're probably also not fearing panic attacks. But this idea is so totally intolerable, so it doesn't feel good to feel those emotions. They're afraid to break down. They're afraid that they might cry. And will they get out of it, or will it make them more inept? Those kind of things. So it's a bit more subtle what they fear and what you want to change if you do exposure with those patients. Any questions so far? Okay, and then I'm a little bit in a minor problem. I'm looking to Danny. Danny? The next thing, I would like to do a demonstration. I would like to have a GAD patients up here, or no, down there. You can show to me, that's totally fine. I would like to show you how I try to convince people to do exposure, to demonstrate it once. And then I would like to also give you a chance to demonstrate. So it would be a good time to do a break now. Is that possible if you go a bit earlier? Because that will take a while. And I would like to give you enough time with my demonstration to have lunch. Or I can ask them, or do you have another, well, it might be 45 minutes or whatever, because I would like to go on and then have lunch. And you already ordered lunch, that's why I'm looking.
12:30.
I would do lunch after.
So who would rather have the break now? Oh, look. And who would rather go through with the demonstration? They are all awake and rather would go on. Good. Danny?
Just to check whether they already brought the
Yeah,
lunch.
okay, they have to check for the brunch. Sorry. So, give him a second. Yeah?
Quick question about the cognitive shift.
The decision was rather postpone and wait.
So how many minutes?
45?
45?
So lunch at 1:15.
It's my guess. You're all experienced? Let's see. Yeah?
Just when speaking about the cognitive shifts that we want,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about when there are positive beliefs about worry, we probably also want, they're scared that if they stop worrying, the bad thing will happen. So that's also probably part of it.
Yeah. I'm a rather nasty person in some regards. So if someone brings that up, I said, let's worry about you not worrying once we got there. So let's first get rid of the worry, and if it proves a problem, we'll go take a look at it. Because I always think they try to postpone exposure. That's why I'm nasty. I think they would rather come up with all those things so that we discuss another 5 hours before we go into it, and I don't want it. And so I say, well, first let's see if it works at all, and then we can worry if it works at all, if it's a problem, if you're not worry anymore. And most of the time that works. And once in a while, it does not work. And they are too afraid. For example, that woman who really thought that if she stops worrying, her link to her son was gone. That was so threatening that we first did some cognitive therapy. Is there another way? I mean, wouldn't it be more effective to send good thoughts to him than worry about him? You can think about something that removes that kind of thing. Does this work, Danny?
45 minutes, yes.
Super. Who would be willing? Do we have a pen? I would really like to. Danny? Would we have a pen for the whiteboard?
I'll find one.
Oh, sorry. Or this might be a really bad idea. Since I'm left-handed, this sounds really bad. Everyone will be awake afterwards. You have one. Super. Super.
May I ask you a question about number 2? Now, ask you a question, how does that work, that the avoidance behavior and reassurance seeking also strengthens the worry?
Because on the short run, you feel better. And that means you get reinforced for the kind of behavior. And on the long run, you do not learn that without the reinsurance, the worry might have gone away by itself.
So it strengthens the need to ask for...
Yeah, to do it again and again and again. And it also, in the end, keeps up the worry because you think you have to do something against the worry, otherwise it wouldn't go. And that's the belief we want to get rid of. Being German, I have a stepped plan how I do that. So these are the steps I more or less run through if I want to sell exposure. And now it would be nice, and you can stay where you are, if someone who knows a good GAD patient would be my GAD patient, so that I can demonstrate those steps. And it will not be don't worry, real therapy session, not at all, but I will also give explanations in between. So who would be willing to be my patient? You all want a demonstration, then someone has to be so nice and be a patient. Patient? Look, I already got one.
Good.
Yes, thanks. No, that's totally fine. No, totally fine. Is someone willing? May I otherwise choose? Is someone willing? Okay, then you will. Yeah? Oh, great, because otherwise I would have taken the German approach and I've got into trouble for that.
No longer a democracy, so
Yeah. What I otherwise do, I say ene, mene, mink, mang, ping, pong, ene, mene, eier, waja, akke, wa, kwek. Great. Okay. First, I put down the ground. If you want to sit there, that would be super. Okay. So usually my patients come with a diary. We don't have a diary, but I would use the diary to help us for the first step. Your name?
Joel.
John. John,
Joel.
Joanne?
Joel.
Joanne. Yeah. Language is not my forte. Okay. I would like to take a good look at yesterday and what worrying was going on yesterday. And so this is the worry amount, or how anxious you felt, or how tense you felt, from 0, all is fine, to 100. Yeah?
80.
Yeah. Let's start. You woke up. When did you wake up?
Yesterday,
Yes.
I could hardly sleep. I woke up at about 4 o'clock in the morning.
4 o'clock. So that's where it started. And where was your, this is a 50, where was your anxiety level? 80, already pretty high up. Okay, what were you thinking about?
Will my children turn out okay?
So you were worrying about your children. Anything else?
Will I have enough money?
Yeah, financial concerns. And how did it go on? Did you go back to sleep, or how did the day go on?
No, I just took a nap in the afternoon because I just couldn't anymore. I was too tired.
Okay, so 4 o'clock you woke up. Did you stay in bed?
I tossed and turned till about 6.
Okay, and any changes here, or more or less ongoing 80%? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it went up and down, like maybe between 60 and 100.
Okay, so somewhere there.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a break, because we don't have that much time, but I usually take a good chunk of a day to get an idea what worry does. The advantage, if you do it, you see if there is some avoidance strategy, if there is, when the worry goes down, why did it go down? Was there a distraction? Did you do something actively? So you get a nice idea if you do that kind of curves. So I usually spend about, in real life, I would spend about 20 minutes on getting an idea about the day, in the hope to get some of the avoidance strategies, distraction strategies, and so on. So to get the base work, so to
I'd
speak.
really rather do applied relaxation, actually.
Yeah. Forget it. Okay, so this would be the first step. That's what I meant with looking at the curves, looking at what does fear, anxiety, worry do over the day. And then you can see, are there control mechanisms? Are they effective? Why does it start off again? Are there triggers? So you get a pretty good idea. And you can also look at short-term and long-term effects later on. You can tell them, so it did help to phone, but half an hour later you were back worrying. So this doesn't seem to be the right way to do it. So this is the groundwork for those kind of things. Some look critical, but you're with me? You know why I do it? Great. Okay, the next is, so we would have done now the whole day. Okay, I would like to take a closer look, really a closer look, putting a loop on it, so to speak, on this time frame when you woke up at 4, and go into the micro detail. So this is now, whereas here we have hours, now we will look at the first, maybe just 10 minutes, who knows? You woke up at 4, and what happened and went through to your head. And it might help if you close your eyes and go back to the situation. So it is morning, you woke up. What was the first thought that went through your head?
How am I going to function today? I'm not going to sleep anymore.
Yeah, no sleep, function. And then?
I just tossed and turned some more. I felt tense all over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were you thinking about it's bad, I'm tense again, or that
I really couldn't
I
sleep.
should? Yeah, and were you concerned about not being able to sleep, thinking like I
maybe I'll
won't?
get sick. Maybe I'll get a cold now, and then.
Yeah, sick and cold.
So I
Okay.
don't sleep also the next night because of the cold.
Yeah. What else were you thinking about then? Did you switch? Because there you mentioned you were thinking about your children. Were they already coming up in the first 10 minutes or not?
Yeah, that was,
Yeah. It's hard to get back into, yeah.
coming and going, yeah.
Coming and going. So there were thoughts about children. What were you thinking about your children?
How will they turn out? You know, some of them have problems in school, and
Yeah. Problems at school. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, I should have.
Hello.
Not used to doing it without a mic on my, like Madonna, someone said. I'm usually playing Madonna up here. Thank you. So this is the next one. I'm after this chaining of thoughts because I find them very important to explain the mechanisms. So first I have to get them. That's what we did. That's step 2. I simply looked, and what I do, I already, instead of having, here I had a more or less straight line, and now I have all those microwaves. New worry goes up a bit, change to another worry, maybe goes down a bit, goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. So instead of the feeling it's all one big mess, you start to show that something is going. Ah, that's you.
it's me.
I thought not again.
I'm gonna mess up. I'm gonna be humiliated. Everybody's gonna think I'm a failure.
Clumsy.
I'm clumsy.
Okay, so you get the idea, huh? What that's the next one. So now in the next step, I would like to show them what the chains do. So you know the function of worry. Okay. So I'd like to do very short thought experiment with you. If you would close your eyes and think of, do you have sons or girls?
Both.
Both. Whom do you worry most about?
Obviously, the sons.
Okay. What are you so worried about? I need a bit of background now.
What?
What is your main worry about the child?
They're gonna do drugs.
Oh, okay, nice. So if you would close your eyes and imagine your son passed out because he used drugs. Can you picture it in front? Yeah. How does that feel?
Tense all over.
Okay,
Yeah,
is it worse? Yeah, so it's your stomach. So what happens if you think about your son doing that? Your tension really goes up, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's that.
Becomes really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, isn't it? So this might not be much fun, but this doesn't happen. Do you get the difference? So if you start to think about it, your body reacts much more strongly.
Right.
So there is a trade-off, I think. That if you worry, it's unpleasant, but you do not get into those uncomfortable peaks.
Right.
And what usually happens is actually our bodies have learned it. It's not something you have chosen consciously. But when you started your worrying, you learn that worrying in a way calms you. Sounds pretty strange, but it helps. It gets you on a more or less even level. And so that feels nice. And that's something our bodies like, and so they learn it. But now you do that 10 hours a day for so many years, and it has become dysfunctional. But you do it probably to avoid this. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Shortcut, thank you. So you have, that's in a nutshell, huh? But this is the idea to make the switch from the worry changes to the function of worry, huh? If you do that, it helps you, but it comes at a price. The price that you now worry all the time. So this is step 3. And step 4, now we move into the kill, so to speak, as the English say. It becomes interesting. What do you think would happen if you would imagine, not if your son would take drugs, but what do you think would happen if I would be a magician and I could project a movie into your head that just goes on and goes on and goes on? I have power over your mind. And for hours you would see your son taking drugs or
So
being passed
I would
out.
say right when you say that, right away the chains start.
Yeah?
So
I know,
say,
but
when
I'm
you
the
said,
magician.
When you said focus on your son, I said, well then how would people look at the family and how it just went to a whole bunch of other chains.
Yeah. And that is what you've learned, and we have to get through. So if I could undo the change and could focus you on one thing, as a magician, and we would get into the, what would happen? And this is my fourth graph.
I would just explode. I would get so tense I would have to go to the bathroom the whole day.
Yeah, but the film would be in your, I would still project. I could do that. Let's just imagine. Doesn't stop. So here's your anxiety, and I usually now would actually need much more room because they have to be able to get really anxious. So if there's 100, your anxiety would go up to 100. Would anything happen, bad happen?
Maybe I would throw up.
Okay, you throw up. Would that lessen your anxiety, or would you still feel as anxious?
I would start to think that I'd have to go to the hospital.
Okay, so you would be worried to get into a hospital because you get,
Maybe
could you,
I'd
do
go
you think?
insane. I lose control of my mind.
Okay, so you lose control of your mind. So this control mind, throw up,
That's more like a panic disorder person.
a bit. Doesn't matter. But you get the idea. I'm doing this to find out what people are afraid of, because I have to overcome their fears. So this is mostly for me a step to get information
Or I never
about.
thought about it. I never thought about it.
Yeah, but they usually, GADs are pretty vague. They say it would be awful, couldn't stand it, but nothing much happens. And then there's the important part is to think how many hours would it take them until the anxiety goes down, because it then has to be. And since I'm a magician, I can show that video for 10 hours, 20 hours, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. That's the nice thing about using this magician idea. And if you would be an anxiety patient, then it would actually, panic patient would look like that. I get really anxious and I die. Yeah, and that's what I'm doing. As I said, I am a slightly nasty person. Or I get very anxious and I faint. And then I ask, do you wake up again? Yeah, anxious again, yeah. And then you have this until someone dies or not. So in panic, it's the same idea, and I find it extremely helpful to get people to do exposure. You get their fears that they will faint, that they will die, but the same with GAD. But in the end, I say, well, and if you don't die and if you don't faint, then there is in the end only just one thing, more or less, or not go crazy. It will go away. So this is the rationale. So after hours or days or whatever, the anxiety will become less. And that gives me then the chance. Sorry about the mess. So that is step 4.
But I didn't catch that. What if they say I'll go crazy? They'll
Yeah.
have to put me
Yeah.
in the
I put it up there. I say crazy is one of the possibilities.
So
Let's
I'll
see.
go away, I'll just be crazy.
Crazy, okay. So, and now I do have to do some classic cognitive therapy. First of all, what means crazy and how likely is it? You know, how likely is it? Do they know people who went crazy? Did they get crazy because they really were worrying, or did they have something else? What is their chance? And then I have this chance, maybe 10% chance that I will get crazy after our discussion, to is it worthwhile, the treatment, the nasty treatment? It's also what you do with panic.
So
And they have usually much higher rating. They have a rating of 40% that they might die. Against,
basically that we could prevent all craziness by just teaching people how to worry better.
yeah, well, it's not as easy. But it's, you get the idea. So in point 4, it's getting the fears and talking about the fears and how likely are they. And then I go on to point 5, where I say, actually, and that's a bit psychoeducation. I say, well, actually, our experience is what happens is you get quite some anxiety or tension, and then after a while it goes down. And if you do it again, maybe you're lucky and you're not getting as anxious again, and it goes down. Or you get as anxious, but it goes faster down the third time. And then unfortunately, there's a fourth or fifth or sixth time where you get really anxious, although things already looked so much better. I always predict a failure if I try to convince people to do exposure. Because otherwise they expect that things will get better and better and better, and you do have failures most of it. Once in a while someone has a bad day, something unpredictable happened, you got to the right theme and it hurts much more than you thought, and it was the fifth session. And then they are afraid that what you told them it will get better and better and better isn't true. So if you build in right here already that there will be fluctuations, but in the long run, you know, the sixth time will be better again, then they don't get scared. And that sees to it that you have way less dropouts during the therapy. It's one of the best things you can do to prevent dropouts. Yeah?
I'm a bit confused.
Yeah?
Because it seems to be talking about classical exposure to anxiety.
Yeah?
And before you talked about that the anxiety itself is not the problem, but the intense emotions are the problem.
Yeah, he has it with tense, huh? So that is my patient, that's why I used tense. He will get very tense. Could be anxious, could be totally emotional, could be grieving. So I substitute what my patient gives to me. I keep with his lingo. Okay, and then the idea is if you do that, now what happens is you have all those strategies, but they all keep, unfortunately, the worry alive, but not as intense emotions that you fear. If we do my strategy for a while, you will get into all the intense emotion, you will feel bad. You will feel worse probably, but in the long run, there is no need to worry anymore. We can break the cycle because you learn that you can keep those, what to do to very efficiently. You can get rid of the anxiety. And then I ask people if they are willing to do it.
So every time something bothers me, I'll have to think about it
You have to think it through.
and worry about it. I mean,
Well, in a way, I haven't given you all the details yet, and I'm not a magician, so I cannot put it into your head. So I really need you to help me in doing that and concentrating on things, otherwise it won't work. But what will happen is it will teach you those things that bother you to treat differently. But it is really the mechanism and not the worry itself that keeps worry alive. And then I have this nice sentence: if you would take this one worry away from your son, you would still worry about a lot of things. But if you learn that worry itself isn't worth the effort, it also helps with the other worries. Once in a while there will be a life circumstance that worry comes up again, but then you know what to do. But all in all, the whole worrying goes way down.
will if I'm alive at the end? If I'm still alive.
If you're still alive. Not crazy.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah. The thing is, no guarantees, huh? But so far, no one I've ever treated died. And neither of one of my colleagues. But it's a risk. You have to think about it. Yeah.
Saying in Hebrew, there's always a first time.
Yes, there's always a first time, and I might do that. Give them the chance to think about it. I'm not believable if I say this is a miracle cure. Yeah?
I know that the classic explanation, rationale is, in the end, the anxiety will go down and very low. But is it truly something that we should or can promise? Because aren't there enough cases where the anxiety will not, where the anxiety might remain on a moderate to high level?
Yeah.
And then, is it right to promise?
Yeah. So it's true, you should never go actually down to the zero, huh? So if this is a 20 or so, huh? And also very important to say there are times in your life it might be more prominent. You know then what to do, but you will not have a very free life. And it is true. And it's actually admittedly also very true for panic disorder. I was involved in Jürgen Markgraf's panic study that he unfortunately, I hope now really will publish, because now he has a follow-up of 25 years. So I did the follow-up of a year later, and what I found very interesting, and then I was still a beginner, I had been part of this panic. So he did a Clark more or less a Clark treatment study with panic patients long time ago, compared pure exposure to pure cognitive to combined cognitive and exposure. Exposure did best, in the long run especially. But still, when I interviewed the patients, I thought there was, I would say, almost 25%, a quarter of the patients that did not fulfill the diagnosis but still had kind of panic attacks, but could live with them. So that seems also to be something. They said it doesn't bother me anymore. Not really, so I can really live my life. There's no avoidance anymore, but if I have a bad day, I might still have a panic attack. And since it was normalized, they wouldn't fulfill the diagnosis, and they themselves thought it is a success, but it might be very disappointing if you never ever wanted to have a panic attack again. But this is something that's very dangerous anyway, because as long as you fight a panic attack, it will always come back. You have to give in, so they are on a good way. I think the same is true, you're totally right with GAD. There are some that will still keep on worrying more. But I would hope that, for example, with this worry hour, because that is another thing that we add on to it, that you also learn to postpone, to then write your own worry exposure later on, that it will become better. So this is the very first step, and then I will talk more about the next steps so you get a better picture of what other things we do. But this is the step to convince our patients. And now I would really like you to try it and do it, because you will have lots of questions once you try it yourself. That's my experience. It sounds very nice when I do it, and when you do it, all of a sudden you get stuck. So the rest of the time for you to try. One thing, please, don't paint only the first step or the worry curves. Yeah? Go ahead as I do. Skip that rather fastly to get down to the meat so that you really have to sell the model, and then let's see where you get stuck. Okay? And paint. I would like to see some papers and pens. Directive therapists are sitting here. Okay.
Am I fixed?
Yes. No, you're ready to get some nasty experiences. No, it's not that bad. Okay. So let's take 20. We need at least 20 minutes for you to practice that. Okay?